Tonight, the air is still. The stars rest quietly above a wide desert, shining with a soft light that has watched over this land for thousands of years. Far below, the Nile River moves slowly through the darkness, carrying cool water between fields of grain, small villages, busy towns, and great temples built from warm-colored stone. Along its gentle banks, the world is sleeping, but not for much longer. Soon, the first faint light will touch the eastern horizon, and another day will begin in ancient Egypt. For now, everything feels peaceful. The river whispers against reeds that sway almost without sound. Palm leaves barely move in the night breeze. Somewhere in the distance, a small fishing boat rocks gently against its rope. A sleepy bird shifts its feathers before becoming still once again. The desert keeps its silence. The stone walls of houses slowly release the warmth they gathered during the long day. Mud brick homes stand close together along narrow streets. Their flat roofs are quiet now. Families sleep beneath woven mats or light linen cloth, grateful for the cooler air that always arrives after sunset. This land knows heat better than almost any other place. Long before anyone imagined machines or electric fans, the people of Egypt learned to live with the sun. They could not escape it. They could only understand it. Every day the bright sky reminded them that life depended on warmth, yet too much warmth could leave a body tired, thirsty, and weak. So they listened carefully. Generation after generation discovered small ways to stay comfortable. None of these ways were quick. None of them chased away the heat completely. Instead, they worked gently with the rhythms of nature, accepting what could not be changed while making daily life just a little easier. Their knowledge grew quietly. It was passed from parents to children, from old neighbors to young families, from experienced builders to new workers shaping fresh bricks beneath the sun. Before dawn arrived, many homes were already beginning to stir. A mother opened her eyes while the sky was still dark blue. She listened for a moment to the quiet breathing of her children. The room smelled faintly of baked earth, dry reeds, and yesterday's bread resting inside a clay container. The floor beneath her was cool. She stood carefully so no one else would wake. Her bare feet touched packed earth that had rested all night beneath cooler air. For a short while each morning, the house offered its greatest gift: coolness. It would not last. Soon the sunlight would reach the outer walls. Slowly the heat would creep into every corner. By midday the rooms would feel much warmer, and everyone inside would notice the change. She knew this without looking outside. Every morning followed nearly the same quiet pattern. She stepped through a small doorway into an open courtyard. Above her, the last stars slowly faded. A soft breeze drifted across the rooftops. It carried the smell of river water mixed with distant smoke from cooking fires beginning to awaken across the village. Nearby, another family was already grinding grain. The steady sound of stone rubbing against stone blended gently with the morning birds. Nothing felt rushed. The coolest hours were precious. People tried to finish their hardest work before the sun climbed high into the sky. Farmers walked toward their fields while shadows were still long. Builders gathered tools before the stones became too hot to touch comfortably. Fishermen pushed their boats into calm water before bright daylight shimmered across the river. Everyone respected the morning. Even children learned to enjoy those first cool moments. A young boy carried a clay jar toward the village well. The vessel felt pleasantly cool against his arms. Clay had a quiet secret. Water resting inside these jars often stayed cooler than the air around them. Tiny amounts of moisture slowly passed through the clay and disappeared into the dry air. As it vanished, it gently lowered the temperature of the water within. No one explained this with science. They simply knew it worked. So nearly every home treasured its clay jars. Some stood in shaded corners where sunlight never reached. Others rested beneath woven covers that protected them from direct heat. A careful family always tried to keep drinking water away from bright afternoon light. The boy filled his jar. The water reflected pale morning colors before settling into perfect stillness. As he lifted the heavy container onto his shoulder, small drops slid down its rough surface. It felt refreshing. Back at home, the family would drink slowly throughout the day, grateful for every cool swallow. As sunrise approached, golden light spread softly across the eastern desert. The first rays touched temple walls, palm trees, and distant hills. Birds became louder now. Donkeys began walking dusty roads carrying baskets of vegetables, bundles of reeds, and sacks of grain. The village awakened without hurry. Women swept courtyards using simple reed brooms. Bakers prepared ovens before temperatures climbed too high. Potters checked their drying vessels. Weavers arranged linen threads beneath shaded workspaces. Shade mattered. Every tree was valuable. Every wall that blocked sunlight offered comfort. Builders understood this well. When they planned homes, they often thought carefully about where sunlight would fall during different hours. Thick mud brick walls did more than hold up roofs. They helped slow the day's heat. During cool nights these walls released warmth, while during blazing afternoons they delayed some of the outside heat from reaching the rooms within. The houses breathed in their own quiet way. Inside, windows were usually small. Large openings welcomed too much sunlight. Smaller ones invited gentle breezes while keeping harsh rays outside. Sometimes narrow windows faced directions where cooler winds often traveled. A simple decision made many years before could make every summer easier. Across Egypt, countless homes quietly followed these same ideas. No two villages looked exactly alike, yet many shared an understanding earned through long experience. Nature taught patient lessons. Along the Nile, the air felt different from the open desert. Water softened the landscape. Reeds grew thick beside the banks. Birds nested among them. Crocodiles rested silently in quieter places far from busy villages. Fishermen knew where to avoid them. The river gave life. It also gave relief. After long hours in nearby fields, workers often washed dust from their faces and arms. Even standing beside flowing water felt different from standing on open sand. Gentle breezes moved across the river's surface before reaching those waiting along the shore. Children laughed softly while splashing near shallow edges under careful watch. Older people sat quietly beneath palm trees. Some simply listened. Water has its own peaceful language. Tiny waves touched muddy banks with endless patience. The sound never hurried. It matched the pace of ancient life. Further away from the river, the air became drier. Dust followed travelers along narrow roads. Sand gathered around sandals. Every step lifted fine particles that drifted lazily before settling once more. Merchants covered their heads with light linen cloth. The fabric served many purposes. It shaded faces. It protected necks. It absorbed sweat. It could even be dampened slightly before especially hot journeys, bringing brief moments of cool comfort. Linen was one of Egypt's greatest treasures. Made from flax plants growing beside the Nile, it became clothing suited perfectly for warm weather. Unlike heavy fabrics, linen allowed air to move freely around the body. Most ordinary workers wore simple garments. Nothing fancy. Nothing unnecessary. Loose clothing helped the body breathe beneath the relentless sun. Children often wore even less during the hottest months. No one wished to carry extra warmth if it could be avoided. By mid-morning the sunlight grew brighter. Builders working on large stone projects already felt it. Huge blocks waited patiently where teams of laborers prepared ropes and wooden sleds. Sweat appeared early on foreheads and shoulders. The work demanded strength. Foremen understood that exhausted workers became slower. So whenever possible, periods of rest found their place within the day. Small shaded shelters stood nearby. Simple roofs made from reeds or woven branches created islands of relief. The difference between standing beneath the open sun and beneath shade could feel remarkable. Workers sat quietly there, drinking water from clay cups. Conversation stayed gentle. Nobody wasted energy speaking loudly. Some closed their eyes for a few moments. Others stretched tired backs while watching bright sunlight shimmer across distant stone. Then, when ready, they returned calmly to their tasks. Nearby, scribes sat differently. Many worked beneath covered areas whenever they could. Their papyrus scrolls needed protection from strong winds and blowing dust. Their ink needed care. A young scribe dipped his reed pen carefully before recording deliveries of limestone. He moved slowly. There was no reason to rush beautiful handwriting. The shaded workspace remained pleasantly cooler than open ground. Even so, small beads of sweat formed along his forehead by late morning. He wiped them away with a strip of linen. Across the marketplace, another kind of rhythm unfolded. Merchants arranged baskets beneath awnings made from woven reeds. Colorful vegetables rested beside dates, onions, garlic, lentils, and fragrant herbs. Customers walked slowly between stalls. The shade beneath stretched cloth felt inviting. People naturally lingered there. Conversations drifted softly through warm air. Prices were discussed. News traveled from village to village. Travelers shared stories of river levels, harvests, and distant relatives. Nothing interrupted the steady pulse of daily life. By noon the heat reached its greatest strength. The sky became almost white with brightness. Shadows shrank beneath walls. Birdsong quieted. Even animals searched patiently for shelter. Dogs rested beneath carts. Goats stood beside buildings. Cats disappeared into cool corners. People changed their pace. Heavy work slowed whenever possible. Many returned indoors if duties allowed. Inside mud brick homes, thick walls had delayed much of the outside warmth. The rooms were not cold. They never were. But they remained gentler than the streets outside. Families often spent these hottest hours quietly. Someone repaired baskets. Another mended clothing. Children rested. An elderly grandmother peeled vegetables while telling calm stories remembered from her own childhood. A sleeping baby breathed peacefully nearby. The house seemed wrapped in stillness. Sometimes a breeze wandered through opposite doorways. When homes were designed carefully, moving air could pass from one side to another. It carried away some of the trapped warmth. Even the smallest breeze became precious. People noticed it immediately. Faces relaxed. Breathing felt easier. Curtains made from woven reeds shifted gently. Dust danced in thin beams of sunlight entering through narrow openings. The afternoon stretched onward. Outside, the streets looked quieter than they had at sunrise. Only necessary travelers continued walking beneath full sunlight. A messenger crossed the village carrying official news sealed with clay. His sandals struck the packed earth with steady rhythm. He paused often beneath whatever shade appeared. A tree. A wall. A covered doorway. Every little refuge mattered. Far away, farmers continued working where irrigation canals fed thirsty crops. Water channels reflected bright skies. Men lifted water using simple tools, their movements practiced through years of repetition. Their muscles worked slowly. There was wisdom in steady effort. Too much speed invited exhaustion. One farmer tied a damp cloth around his neck. Another poured a little water across his wrists before returning to work. These tiny comforts became part of ordinary life. No one expected complete relief. They simply gathered small moments of ease whenever they appeared. The fields smelled of wet earth. Young plants stood quietly in neat rows. Dragonflies schemed above shallow water. The sound of frogs blended with distant voices carried gently by the wind. Life continued beneath the great Egyptian sun. As afternoon slowly softened, shadows lengthened once again. The hardest heat finally began to loosen its hold. People noticed without needing to speak. Breathing felt lighter. Walking required less effort. Children emerged from houses. Workshops became busier again. Potters returned to shaping clay. Carpenters resumed smoothing wooden boards. Stone workers lifted tools once more. The village slowly awakened for its second rhythm of the day. This evening work often felt easier than the long hours around noon. Golden sunlight replaced harsh white brightness. Palm trees cast graceful shadows across narrow streets. The Nile reflected warm colors. Boats drifted home carrying fish caught during quieter hours. Families prepared evening meals. Smoke rose gently from cooking fires. The smell of fresh bread floated between homes. Someone stirred lentils inside a clay pot. Another roasted onions until their sweet scent filled the air. Neighbors exchanged quiet greetings while carrying water jars home. Children helped gather bundles of reeds for tomorrow's cooking fires. Old men sat together discussing river levels with calm voices. Old women wove baskets beneath fading daylight. The village relaxed without becoming silent. As darkness approached once again, rooftops became welcoming places. Many families climbed simple ladders carrying woven sleeping mats. Flat roofs offered cooler air than rooms below. Above them stretched an endless sky filled with stars. The heat trapped inside buildings slowly escaped into the night. Parents spread light linen sheets. Children pointed toward familiar constellations. Someone whispered an old story passed through generations. The breeze became cooler. The day's exhaustion gently faded. Bodies that had worked beneath the sun now rested beneath moonlight. No machines hummed. No lamps filled entire streets with brightness. Only small oil lamps glowed softly inside homes. Beyond them, darkness returned naturally. The Nile continued flowing exactly as it had before sunrise, carrying cool water quietly through the heart of Egypt, while another peaceful night settled over the warm land, inviting every tired worker to rest before dawn gently called them once again. The evening breeze drifted quietly across the rooftops, carrying with it the gentle scent of river water, warm earth, and the faint sweetness of date palms. After a long day beneath the bright Egyptian sun, the people of the village welcomed these cooler hours with quiet gratitude. No one hurried. There was no reason to. The hardest work had already been done, and the land itself seemed ready to rest. Families remained on their flat roofs, where the night air moved more freely than inside the rooms below. Woven reed mats covered the warm plaster, and simple linen blankets lay folded nearby for the hours before dawn, when the desert air could become surprisingly cool. Children whispered softly while looking toward the stars. They had heard many stories about the sky from their parents and grandparents. Some stories spoke of the gods, while others simply described familiar stars that helped fishermen find their way along the Nile during quiet nights. The voices were gentle, never loud enough to disturb nearby neighbors, who were also settling into peaceful conversation before sleep slowly claimed the village. Across the rooftops, tiny oil lamps flickered for a little while before one by one they disappeared into darkness. Oil was valuable, and few people wasted it once its light was no longer needed. Soon only the moon remained, bathing the mud brick homes in a soft silver glow. The walls that had absorbed so much heat during the afternoon now slowly released it into the night. It happened so gradually that no one noticed the change from one moment to the next. The warmth simply drifted away, little by little, until the air became pleasant enough for deep, restful sleep. This quiet cooling of the night was one of nature's greatest gifts. The people of Egypt trusted it. Every evening followed this patient rhythm, and every morning rewarded those who had rested well before another day beneath the sun. Long before sunrise, the village stirred once again. A rooster called somewhere beyond the fields. A donkey shook its head, its harness making a soft clinking sound. From one house came the quiet scrape of a wooden door opening. A woman stepped into the courtyard carrying an empty clay jar. The stars still filled most of the sky, but a faint pale line had begun to appear far beyond the eastern horizon. She breathed deeply. The air still carried the coolness of night. These moments before dawn were precious. She crossed the narrow street without disturbing anyone and walked toward the village well. Other women were already there, exchanging sleepy smiles rather than long conversations. Their voices remained low, almost blending with the gentle rustle of palm leaves overhead. One by one, the jars filled with fresh water from deep below the earth. The cool weight of each vessel rested comfortably against the shoulder. The rough surface of the clay felt slightly damp, and everyone knew that as the day grew hotter, this same clay would help keep the water inside refreshingly cool. Some families wrapped damp linen around the outside of their water jars before placing them in shaded corners of the house. Others rested the jars on raised stands where air could move freely around them. No one thought of these as clever inventions. They were simply ordinary habits learned from parents, grandparents, and neighbors over countless generations. Knowledge lived quietly in everyday routines. As the eastern sky brightened, the village gradually filled with familiar sounds. Stone grinding grain. Goats calling softly. Sandals brushing across dusty paths. Wooden wheels turning beneath small carts. The smell of fresh bread slowly drifted through the streets as bakers prepared the first loaves of the morning. The ovens were already warm, but experienced bakers knew exactly when to begin their work. By starting before sunrise, they avoided standing beside blazing fires during the hottest hours of the afternoon. Even their work followed the rhythm of the sun. Inside one bakery, a young apprentice shaped small rounds of dough while his teacher watched patiently. Flour dust floated gently through narrow beams of morning light. The thick mud brick walls kept much of yesterday's heat outside, allowing the room to remain comfortable for a little longer. The apprentice wiped his forehead with a strip of linen. Not because he was already overheated, but because he knew that before long the warmth would begin to build. He smiled quietly. This was simply another morning. Nothing unusual. Nothing difficult beyond what every day already offered. Outside, farmers walked toward green fields bordering the Nile. The river shimmered beneath the first golden sunlight. Its surface looked almost perfectly smooth except where small fishing boats disturbed the water with gentle ripples. The fishermen had been awake for some time. Many preferred the quiet hours before sunrise. The fish often moved differently during these cooler moments, and rowing required far less effort before the blazing heat settled over the river. One elderly fisherman dipped his hand into the Nile as his boat drifted slowly. The cool water slipped between his fingers. For a brief moment, the warmth of yesterday seemed very far away. He had spent nearly his entire life beside this river. He knew every gentle bend, every patch of reeds, every place where birds gathered each season. The Nile was more than water. It was comfort. It softened the harshness of the surrounding desert. Its breezes carried relief across nearby villages. Its yearly floods nourished the fields. Its quiet presence shaped nearly every part of Egyptian life. Along the riverbanks, children gathered bundles of papyrus while older family members prepared fishing nets for another day. The soft rustling of tall reeds blended with birdsong and the distant splash of oars entering calm water. Nothing interrupted the peaceful rhythm. Even the sun seemed gentle during these first hours. Builders also welcomed the morning. Large construction sites became active before the light grew intense. Teams of workers organized tools, ropes, wooden sleds, and baskets while supervisors quietly assigned the day's tasks. There was no shouting. Most people already knew exactly what needed to be done. Years of experience had created an orderly rhythm that required very few words. Nearby stood simple shelters made from wooden poles and woven reed roofs. These shaded spaces were carefully placed where workers could rest once the sun climbed higher. A young stone cutter sharpened his copper tools before beginning his work. The metal caught the morning light. Soon those same tools would grow warm enough that they could no longer be held comfortably without short breaks. He understood this well. Everyone did. No one expected endless strength beneath the Egyptian sun. Strength came from steady effort, careful pacing, and knowing when to pause. As the morning continued, merchants arrived from neighboring villages. Their donkeys carried baskets filled with onions, figs, garlic, fresh herbs, woven baskets, pottery, linen cloth, and small wooden tools. Many merchants wore light-colored linen wrapped loosely around their bodies. The fabric moved gently with each step, allowing air to flow freely. Some covered their heads with folded linen to protect their faces from direct sunlight. Others carried small clay water bottles hanging from leather straps. Every traveler respected the journey. Dust covered their sandals long before midday. The roads themselves reflected the sunlight. Their pale surfaces seemed almost to glow beneath the growing brightness. Travelers naturally searched for stretches lined with trees whenever possible. A single sycamore tree could become a welcome resting place for strangers who had never met one another. They might sit together for a few quiet minutes without exchanging many words. The shade itself was enough to unite them. Birds rested there as well. So did goats. Even insects seemed less hurried beneath the cool shelter of broad leaves. In the marketplace, woven reed awnings stretched from one stall to another. These simple coverings transformed the space beneath them. The sunlight softened. The air felt calmer. Customers lingered longer where shade welcomed them. Potters displayed smooth water jars beside painted bowls. Basket makers arranged tightly woven reed baskets of every size. Linen sellers unfolded fresh cloth that fluttered gently whenever a breeze wandered through the market. The smell of fresh bread mixed with herbs, onions, warm dust, and river air. Children followed their parents quietly, sometimes carrying small baskets much too large for their little hands. Nearby, an elderly woman sold cool water from large clay jars resting beneath heavy shade. Travelers stopped gratefully. She filled small cups without hurry. The water tasted fresh. The clay vessel had quietly done its work all morning. Tiny amounts of moisture had escaped through its walls, gently cooling everything inside. No one stopped to admire the jar. Its usefulness spoke for itself. By late morning the brightness became almost overwhelming. The sunlight poured over rooftops, temple walls, and open fields with unwavering strength. The air itself seemed slower. Voices became quieter. Movements became more deliberate. People naturally adjusted their pace. There was wisdom in accepting the day's rhythm rather than struggling against it. Inside one modest home, a family gathered in the coolest room they had. Its walls were especially thick, and only a small window faced the outside. Little direct sunlight entered. Instead, soft reflected light filled the room with a peaceful glow. The grandmother sat weaving flax fibers into fine thread. Nearby, her daughter prepared vegetables for the afternoon meal. A young boy rested against the wall after helping his father in the fields. No one minded the silence. The gentle scrape of weaving. The quiet sound of a knife slicing onions. The occasional flutter of a pigeon landing somewhere above the roof. These simple sounds filled the house with calm. From time to time, someone stepped into the shaded courtyard. There stood another clay jar resting on a low stone platform. The water remained surprisingly cool despite the rising heat outside. Each family member drank slowly. Water was respected. It was never wasted. A few drops sometimes fell onto the packed earth floor. They disappeared almost immediately, leaving behind only a faint dark mark before the dry air claimed them once more. Outside, the village waited patiently for the hottest hours to pass, knowing that, just as every day before it, the blazing sun would eventually soften, the shadows would lengthen, and the gentle evening breeze would return once again to carry cool relief across the quiet banks of the timeless Nile. The afternoon settled over the village with quiet certainty. The bright sky stretched from one horizon to the other without a single cloud to soften its light. The sun stood high above the Nile, and every stone, every wall, every narrow path seemed to glow beneath its steady warmth. Even the birds had become quieter now, saving their songs for the cooler hours that would come later. Life did not stop. It simply slowed. The people of ancient Egypt had learned long ago that there was no victory in fighting the heat. The sun could not be hurried, argued with, or ignored. It followed the same path every day, rising gently in the east, climbing slowly overhead, and drifting toward the western desert before disappearing into another peaceful night. So the people shaped their lives around its rhythm. In a village not far from the river, a potter sat beneath a roof woven from palm branches and reeds. Sunlight slipped through tiny gaps, leaving soft patterns across the ground. The shade was not perfect, but it was enough. The moving air beneath the shelter felt cooler than the open street, and every small breeze carried away a little of the day's warmth. His hands rested upon a spinning wheel made from smooth wood. A lump of damp clay waited in the center. The clay felt cool against his fingers. That coolness never lasted very long, but for a few quiet moments it was enough to remind him that water still lived inside the earth. He pressed gently, shaping the vessel little by little. The walls rose evenly beneath careful hands that had repeated these same movements for many years. Around him stood dozens of finished jars. Some were large enough to hold water for an entire family. Others were small enough for a traveler to carry during a journey along dusty roads. Each one would help someone endure another season beneath the Egyptian sun. The potter smiled quietly whenever he thought about that. He did not build temples. He did not record royal history. His name would never be carved into great monuments. Yet every household depended upon work like his. Without clay jars, water warmed quickly. Without cool water, the long afternoons became far more difficult. His craft was simple. His craft was necessary. Only a short walk away, another craftsman worked with woven reeds gathered from the banks of the Nile. His fingers moved steadily through bundles that had dried beneath gentle shade. He tied them together with flax cord, creating wide mats that would soon cover rooftops, floors, and shaded courtyards. These mats served many quiet purposes. Families sat upon them while preparing meals. Children slept on them during warm nights. Merchants rolled them into temporary awnings across market stalls. Workers spread them beneath simple shelters near building sites. Every woven strand carried the memory of the river where it had grown. As the craftsman worked, he listened to the soft sounds around him. Somewhere nearby, a woman ground grain between two heavy stones. The slow, circular rhythm never seemed to end. Farther away, a donkey pulled a small cart filled with fresh vegetables. Its hooves stirred light clouds of dust that drifted lazily before settling once more upon the road. Nothing felt hurried. Even the dust seemed content to move slowly. Across the village, many doorways remained covered by hanging reed screens. From a distance they looked ordinary. Yet these simple coverings played an important part in everyday comfort. Sometimes family members sprinkled a little water across the woven reeds. As the breeze passed through the damp fibers, the air entering the house felt slightly cooler. The change was gentle, barely noticeable at first. But after hours beneath the afternoon sun, even a small difference brought welcome relief. A grandmother sitting near one doorway closed her eyes as the breeze touched her face. She smiled without speaking. She had known this feeling since childhood. Her own grandmother had done the same many years before. Some traditions never needed explanation. They simply became part of life. Inside the house, sunlight reached only a few narrow places. Most of the room remained shaded. Clay jars rested against the coolest wall. Baskets of onions and garlic hung from wooden pegs where air could move around them. Bundles of dried herbs filled the room with a soft earthy scent. Fresh bread rested beneath linen cloth. Everything had its place. Everything had been arranged with care. The builders who shaped these homes understood more than bricks and plaster. They understood the path of sunlight. They understood the direction of seasonal winds. They knew that a narrow alley between houses created longer shadows. They knew that thicker walls remained cooler during the hottest hours. They knew that an open courtyard welcomed moving air into the center of family life. These ideas were not written inside great libraries. They lived in memory. A father taught his son. A master guided his apprentice. Generation after generation, villages slowly improved without anyone thinking of the changes as inventions. They were simply lessons learned through patient observation. Far beyond the houses, fields stretched toward the shining river. The crops stood quietly beneath the afternoon light. Some workers had returned after resting through the hottest hours. Others waited a little longer beneath trees that lined irrigation canals. Water moved slowly through carefully shaped channels. Its gentle sound softened the stillness of the afternoon. A young farmer removed his sandals before stepping into the shallow canal. The cool mud pressed gently between his toes. For a few moments he simply stood there. The water reached only his ankles, yet the relief spread through his whole body. Nearby, another farmer laughed softly as he washed dust from his arms. No one stayed long. There was still work to finish before sunset. But these quiet moments beside the water helped restore tired muscles. The Nile offered comfort in countless small ways. Not only through drinking water. Not only through harvests. It offered cool breezes. Moist air. Shade from riverside trees. The peaceful sound of flowing water. Even watching sunlight dance upon its surface seemed to ease the mind after long hours beneath open skies. A little farther downstream, fishermen repaired their nets beneath tall date palms. The shade beneath the trees shifted slowly as the afternoon passed. One old fisherman examined every knot carefully. His hands were rough from many seasons of rowing, casting, and pulling heavy nets from the river. His grandson sat beside him, patiently learning each movement. The boy watched closely. The old man rarely spoke while working. He believed that careful hands learned best through quiet observation. Now and then he pointed toward a loose knot. The boy corrected it. Then both continued without another word. Above them, palm leaves whispered gently whenever the breeze returned. Their soft rustling blended with distant birds and the quiet splash of fish breaking the river's surface. The sounds carried no urgency. They belonged to an ordinary afternoon. Along another path, two merchants traveled with donkeys loaded with folded linen. The animals walked steadily, never rushing despite the warmth. Each time they reached a shaded grove, the merchants stopped. One offered water to the donkeys before drinking himself. The other checked the straps securing the bundles. Everything was done with patience. Long journeys rewarded calm minds more than hurried feet. They understood that arriving safely mattered far more than arriving quickly. As the sun slowly began its descent, its fierce white light softened into warmer shades of gold. The change happened so gradually that few people noticed the exact moment. Yet everyone felt it. The air seemed easier to breathe. Shadows stretched farther across the ground. Birdsong slowly returned. Children appeared once again in narrow streets, carrying little clay toys or chasing one another around quiet courtyards. Laughter drifted gently through the village. Nearby, women gathered beside communal ovens. Fresh dough waited beneath linen cloth. One by one, loaves disappeared into the warm ovens. Soon the familiar smell of baking bread filled the evening air. The scent traveled through winding streets, mixing with roasted onions, lentil stew, herbs, and smoke rising from small cooking fires. Neighbors greeted one another while waiting. Some exchanged vegetables. Others shared news from nearby villages. An elderly man spoke quietly about the river's water level. Another mentioned that the flax harvest looked promising this season. Their conversations flowed as gently as the Nile itself. No one interrupted. No one hurried to finish speaking. Time moved differently here. Close to the village edge, children carried small baskets toward the riverbank. Inside were smooth stones collected during the day. They enjoyed skipping them across calm water before returning home for the evening meal. Their parents watched from nearby, smiling softly. The river reflected the golden sky like polished bronze. A light breeze crossed its surface and drifted toward the shore. Everyone noticed it. Faces lifted slightly. Shoulders relaxed. The day's greatest heat had finally begun to fade. On rooftops, families prepared for another peaceful night. Reed mats were unrolled across flat plaster surfaces. Clay water jars were carried upstairs where everyone could drink before sleep. Some mothers lightly sprinkled water over sections of the roof. The moisture disappeared quickly into the warm surface, leaving behind a brief coolness that made sitting there even more comfortable. Children lay on their backs, pointing toward birds flying home across the evening sky. Their fathers quietly repaired sandals or small wooden tools while listening to distant voices carried on the breeze. Grandmothers untangled flax fibers beneath fading sunlight. Grandfathers leaned against low walls, watching the changing colors over the western desert. As darkness slowly approached, the first stars appeared once again above ancient Egypt. The same stars that had watched over countless generations. The same stars that would return tomorrow night. And the night after that. Below them, the village settled into another familiar rhythm, grateful for the cool air that gently wrapped itself around the mud brick homes, the quiet courtyards, the shaded workshops, and the peaceful people who had learned, through patience and careful observation, that comfort did not always come from changing the world around them. Sometimes, it came from understanding it, and living gently within its timeless rhythm. Night settled completely across the Nile Valley, not with sudden darkness, but with a slow and gentle fading of light. The western sky held its warm colors for a little while longer, glowing softly behind distant desert hills before surrendering to deep shades of blue. One by one, the stars appeared, as though they had been waiting patiently beyond the daylight, ready to return to their familiar places above the quiet land. The village seemed to breathe more easily. Throughout the long afternoon, the warmth had rested upon every roof, every stone, every tree, and every stretch of dusty road. Now that warmth slowly drifted upward into the open sky. It happened so quietly that no one could see it, yet everyone could feel it. Children noticed first. Their bare feet, which had hurried across shaded patches during the hottest hours, now wandered freely across rooftops and courtyards. The plaster beneath them no longer felt hot. It held only the gentle memory of the day's sunshine. Families gathered outside their homes. Some remained on the flat roofs. Others chose small courtyards where climbing vines cast soft shadows beneath the moonlight. The evening meal had finished. Clay bowls rested empty beside woven baskets that still carried the faint scent of fresh bread. A few dates remained in wooden dishes. Small cups sat beside cool water jars, their smooth surfaces damp with tiny drops of moisture. An elderly woman lifted one of the jars carefully. She poured water into simple clay cups for her grandchildren. The children drank slowly. The water felt wonderfully cool after the warmth of the day. They did not think about how the jar had kept it that way. To them, it had always been normal. To their grandmother, it was another quiet example of the wisdom that surrounded everyday life. When she herself had been a little girl, her own grandmother had taught her never to leave a water jar where the afternoon sun could touch it. She had shown her how to place it near the thickest wall of the house, where the earth beneath remained cool for many hours. She remembered those lessons even now. Some knowledge did not need to be written on papyrus. It simply lived inside careful hands. Across the rooftop, her son spread fresh reed mats where the family would sleep later that night. Each mat had been woven months earlier by neighbors from reeds gathered along the Nile. Though simple, they allowed air to move beneath the sleeping body. They stayed cleaner than bare plaster and felt comfortable against tired muscles after long days of work. Nearby, his wife shook out thin linen sheets before folding them neatly. The cloth moved gently in the evening breeze. Linen was light. It never trapped unnecessary warmth. It allowed even the smallest whisper of moving air to reach the skin. This was one reason the people of Egypt treasured it so deeply. It suited the land. Nothing about it felt heavy. Nothing about it asked the body to carry more warmth than it already must. As darkness deepened, the sounds of the village became softer. A donkey shifted inside a small enclosure. Goats settled close together for the night. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked only once before becoming quiet again. From the river came the gentle splash of oars. A few fishermen preferred the peaceful hours of darkness. The Nile changed at night. The surface reflected the stars instead of the sun. The water carried cooler air across its wide surface, sending slow breezes inland toward villages sleeping along its banks. One fisherman guided his small wooden boat without hurry. He had traveled these waters since childhood. Even in darkness, every bend of the river felt familiar. The reeds whispered as the boat drifted past them. Fish disturbed the calm surface from time to time, leaving circles that slowly disappeared into stillness. The man paused his rowing. He simply listened. There were many sounds that belonged only to the night. Frogs calling from hidden places. The gentle rustle of papyrus. A distant owl. Water touching wood. These quiet voices reminded him that while people slept, the Nile continued its endless journey toward the sea. Farther inland, the air felt different. Without the river nearby, the desert released the heat it had stored all day. The ground remained warm, yet the sky above grew steadily cooler. This meeting of warm earth and cool night created gentle currents of air that wandered slowly across fields and villages. The people welcomed them. A breeze entered through the narrow doorway of one mud brick home. It crossed the shaded courtyard before slipping out through another opening on the opposite side. The family had arranged their home with care. Years earlier, when the house had first been built, the father had insisted that the courtyard remain open to the sky. Some neighbors wondered why he had given away valuable roof space. But he understood something simple. An open courtyard gathered cool night air. As the hours passed, that air slowly drifted into the surrounding rooms. The house never became cold. It became comfortable. His children had grown up enjoying peaceful nights there. Now they were adults, building homes of their own. Without thinking very much about it, they copied the same design. That was how knowledge traveled. Not through grand speeches. Not through written instructions. But through ordinary lives lived day after day. Before sunrise, another family would repeat these same quiet routines. They would rise early. They would work while the air remained cool. They would rest during the strongest heat. They would welcome the evening breeze. And their children would watch. One day those children would do exactly the same. At the edge of the village stood a larger home belonging to a respected scribe. Although it was larger than most, it followed many of the same ideas. Its walls were thick. Its windows were narrow. The courtyard contained a small pool used for washing. Even that little pool changed the feeling of the air. During the evening, moisture rose gently from the water. When the breeze crossed its surface, it carried a touch of coolness into nearby rooms. The difference was slight. Yet after many hours beneath the Egyptian sun, slight differences mattered greatly. The scribe sat beside the pool with the rolled papyrus resting across his knees. His work for the day was finished. The accounts had been recorded. The grain deliveries counted. The temple records carefully copied. Now he simply watched the moon reflected upon the still water. The reflection trembled whenever the breeze passed. For a long while he remained there without writing a single word. Not every quiet moment needed to become history. Some moments existed only to be lived. Across the village, another craftsman prepared for tomorrow. He was a carpenter. His wooden tools rested neatly against the wall. He rubbed a little oil into the handles before placing them carefully inside a woven basket. Wood was precious. Tools lasted many years when treated kindly. He understood that tomorrow would bring another hot day. Before sunrise he would begin again. There was comfort in familiar work. There was peace in routine. Nearby, his youngest daughter filled several clay bowls with clean water. She placed one beside the family doorway. Another beneath a shaded window. A third beside the sleeping area. The bowls served many purposes. Someone might drink during the night. A traveler could stop for a refreshing sip. Sometimes the family simply dipped their hands into the cool water before resting. The feeling lasted only a few moments. Yet those moments were enough. As midnight approached, Silence spread gently through the village. Most lamps had gone dark. Only the temple maintained a few small flames. Priests moved quietly through familiar duties, careful not to disturb the stillness surrounding them. The great stone walls of the temple, warmed throughout the day, now released their stored heat into the cool night air. Owls perched upon high columns. Bats circled silently above open courtyards. Even the enormous statues standing before the entrance seemed calmer beneath moonlight than they had beneath the blazing afternoon sun. The stone itself appeared softer. Its sharp edges faded into gentle shadows. Many travelers believed temples felt cooler than the open streets. Part of this came from their enormous walls. Part came from shaded courtyards surrounded by towering columns. The builders had understood how light and shadow could shape comfort as surely as they shaped beauty. A young apprentice sweeping the temple floor paused for a moment beneath one of those columns. He leaned lightly against the cool stone. It still held a trace of the night's freshness where sunlight had not reached all afternoon. He closed his eyes for a single quiet breath before returning to his work. No one hurried him. The temple itself seemed to encourage calm movements. Outside its walls, the moon continued its slow journey across the sky. The Nile shimmered quietly. Palm trees swayed almost too gently to notice. Reeds whispered beside the riverbanks. Sleeping villages rested beneath blankets of stars. And everywhere across ancient Egypt, from humble fishermen's huts to spacious homes of skilled craftsmen, people depended not on machines or inventions, but on careful habits, thoughtful building, flowing water, cool clay, moving air, patient routines, and generations of quiet wisdom that allowed them to greet each sunrise with strength, endure the long warmth of the day, and finally welcome the peaceful comfort of another cool night beside the timeless Nile. Long before the first hint of dawn reached the eastern horizon, the night remained calm over the Nile Valley. The stars seemed brighter now that every lamp in the village had been extinguished. Above the flat rooftops, the sky stretched endlessly, clear and deep, untouched by clouds. The moon had begun its slow journey toward the western desert, leaving behind a softer darkness that wrapped gently around the sleeping homes. Almost everyone rested. From above, the village looked peaceful beyond words. Rows of mud brick houses stood quietly beside narrow lanes where only a few hours earlier children had played and neighbors had shared their evening meal. The dusty roads were empty now. Baskets leaned against walls where they had been left after the day's work. Wooden carts stood motionless beneath trees. Clay jars rested in shaded corners, patiently holding cool water for another day that had not yet begun. Only the sounds of nature remained awake. The Nile flowed with the same gentle rhythm it had carried for thousands of years. Water slipped around reeds with barely a whisper. Fish disturbed the surface from time to time, leaving circles that spread slowly before disappearing into darkness. Somewhere farther upstream, a heron stood perfectly still in shallow water, waiting with endless patience. The air beside the river felt fresh. Not cold. Simply gentle. It carried a hint of moisture that softened the dry breath of the surrounding desert. A fisherman sleeping on the deck of his small boat pulled his linen covering a little closer around his shoulders. During the afternoon he had wished for nothing more than relief from the heat. Now, before dawn, the air had become cool enough to feel almost refreshing. This quiet change was familiar. Every day the people of Egypt trusted the night to return a little comfort after the long hours beneath the sun. It never failed them. Across the village rooftops, families slept peacefully beneath the open sky. Many preferred sleeping outside whenever the weather allowed. Inside the rooms below, the thick mud brick walls held onto some of the day's warmth. But on the roofs, the breeze moved freely from every direction. A young mother stirred gently as one of her children shifted beside her. She looked upward for a moment. The stars were countless. She had seen them every clear night since she was a little girl. Their arrangement never seemed exactly the same, yet somehow they always felt familiar. She listened. The breathing of her children. The quiet rustling of palm leaves. The distant splash of water against the riverbank. Nothing else. Satisfied that everyone slept comfortably, she closed her eyes again. Nearby, another family rested in their shaded courtyard instead of the roof. Their courtyard was surrounded on four sides by thick walls that had protected them from the afternoon heat. During the night, those same walls slowly cooled beneath the open sky. A soft breeze drifted down into the center of the house, carrying with it the scent of damp earth from several clay water jars placed near the doorway. The family's grandfather had built the house many years before. He had chosen every part of its design carefully. The doorway faced away from the strongest afternoon sunlight. The courtyard remained open above. The storage rooms stayed along the western side, where the thick walls received the greatest heat before protecting the living spaces behind them. No one had called him an architect. He had simply been an experienced builder. Like many craftsmen before him, he understood the land because he had lived beside it his entire life. He knew how shadows moved across walls. He knew where breezes usually entered after sunset. He knew that a tree planted today might not provide much shade for several years, yet one day his grandchildren would rest beneath its branches. So he planted it anyway. That tree now stood quietly beside the courtyard wall. Its leaves hardly moved in the gentle night air. At the edge of the village, two guards watched over a grain storehouse. Their work was peaceful. Most nights passed without interruption. They sat beneath a simple shelter made from wooden posts supporting a roof of woven reeds. Even in darkness, the shelter offered comfort. It caught the cool breeze and slowed the settling dew that sometimes formed before sunrise. One guard poured water from a clay jar into two small cups. Neither man spoke for several moments. They simply drank. The water remained pleasantly cool despite having been stored throughout the previous day. The clay vessel had done exactly what generations of potters had intended. It had protected one of life's greatest comforts. When they finished drinking, the older guard smiled quietly. "There is no better water than water kept in good clay," he murmured. The younger man nodded. He had heard those words from his own father many years earlier. Some sayings needed no further explanation. They survived because everyone understood them. Not far away, a baker was already awake. His work always began before the village stirred. The bakery remained cool during these early hours, making it the perfect time to prepare the first loaves of the day. He opened a heavy wooden door. Night air drifted inside. For a few precious moments, the room felt almost cool against his skin. He gathered flour from woven sacks stacked neatly against the wall. Clay bowls waited upon a low table. Fresh water stood nearby. He mixed the dough slowly. Outside, the stars still filled the sky. By the time the first rays of sunlight reached the village, warm bread would already be filling the air with its familiar scent. His routine never changed very much. He found comfort in that. Each movement belonged to memory. His hands knew what to do before his thoughts had fully awakened. As he kneaded the dough, he listened to the silence beyond the doorway. It would not remain silent for long. Soon footsteps would appear. Then voices. Then carts. Then animals. Then the endless rhythm of another Egyptian morning. But for now, he worked almost alone with only the sound of his own breathing and the soft movement of dough beneath his palms. Farther along the riverbank, the first fishermen began preparing their boats. The eastern sky had grown only slightly lighter. A faint silver line rested upon the horizon. One by one, they untied ropes fastening their boats to wooden posts driven deep into the muddy bank. The river looked different before sunrise. Without the bright reflection of the sun, its surface resembled polished stone. The water seemed calm enough to hold the stars themselves. One young fisherman dipped a clay cup into the river before washing his face. The cool water chased away the last traces of sleep. He smiled. The day had not yet become hot. For a little while longer, the world belonged to cool air, quiet water, and gentle light. Nearby, an older fisherman inspected the woven reeds covering part of his boat. The simple roof provided shade later in the day when the sun climbed overhead. It was not large. It did not block every ray. But even partial shade could transform long hours upon the river. The old man tightened one loose cord before stepping aboard. He had repaired the shelter many times over the years. Reeds eventually dried. Cord eventually loosened. Everything required care. Nothing lasted forever. The same patient attention filled every corner of Egyptian life. A potter repaired cracked jars instead of throwing them away. A weaver strengthened worn mats. A carpenter smoothed rough handles before they splintered. People lived close to their tools, their homes, and the land itself. They noticed small changes. They fixed little problems before they became larger ones. As the eastern horizon slowly brightened, birds began calling from the date palms. Their voices arrived one at a time. First a single note, then another. Soon the quiet village filled with soft birdsong carried gently through the cool morning air. A little girl opened her eyes. She remained lying still beneath her linen covering for a few moments. She could hear her father moving nearby. He always rose before everyone else. Soon he would leave for the fields beside the Nile while the air remained comfortable enough for heavy work. She watched him quietly. He folded his sleeping mat, rolled his linen blanket, drank from the family's clay water jar, then stood at the edge of the roof looking toward the brightening sky. He always paused there, not because he was in a hurry to begin work, but because he appreciated these few peaceful moments before the day truly began. The village looked beautiful before sunrise. The rooftops glowed softly beneath the fading moonlight. Palm trees stood like quiet guardians over narrow streets. Thin curls of smoke had already begun rising from one or two early kitchens. The air smelled of cool earth and distant river water. For a brief time, it was difficult to imagine the fierce heat that would arrive only a few hours later. Yet everyone knew it was coming. No one complained. No one feared it. They had prepared for it before they even opened their eyes. Their homes had been built with care. Their water had been stored wisely. Their clothing had been chosen for comfort. Their work would follow the path of the sun. And so, as the first golden light slowly touched the tops of the palm trees and spread across the peaceful villages lining the banks of the Nile, another ordinary day began, one shaped not by resistance to the heat, but by generations of quiet understanding, patient observation, and the timeless rhythm of a people who had learned to live gently with the warmth of their ancient world. The first light of morning spread slowly across the Nile Valley, so gently that it seemed to awaken the land without disturbing its peace. The eastern sky changed from deep blue to pale silver, then to soft shades of rose and gold. The stars faded one by one, not because they disappeared, but because the growing daylight quietly welcomed another beginning. Across the village, doors opened with familiar wooden creaks. Families stepped into cool courtyards while the earth still held the freshness of the night. These early moments were treasured by everyone, from the youngest child to the oldest farmer. The air was calm, carrying the scent of moist river reeds, fresh bread, and damp clay. For a little while longer, the sun remained gentle. An elderly woman crossed her courtyard carrying a woven basket filled with freshly washed linen. She did not hang the cloth immediately beneath the open sky. Instead, she chose the eastern side of the courtyard, where the first light arrived softly and the stronger afternoon sun would not reach until much later. She understood how quickly linen could become warm. She had learned that lesson many years before. When she was a young bride, she had once left clean cloth folded in direct sunlight. By the time her family returned from the fields, the linen felt almost hot enough to warm their hands. Her mother had smiled kindly. There is no need to let the sun keep what the shade can protect. From that day forward, she always searched for the coolest place before putting anything away. Now she watched her own granddaughter doing exactly the same thing. The lesson had quietly traveled across 3 generations. Not through books. Not through formal teaching. Simply through living together. Nearby, the village baker carried warm loaves from his oven. Steam rose gently into the cool morning air. The smell drifted through narrow streets, reaching homes where families had only just awakened. Children recognized that scent immediately. Fresh bread meant another day had begun. Neighbors greeted one another with calm smiles as they passed the bakery. No one seemed rushed. Even those who had fields to tend or boats to prepare moved with a steady, measured pace. They knew there was no benefit in spending precious energy too early. The heat would demand enough from them before the day was finished. Along the Nile, fishermen untied their boats. Morning mist hovered lightly above the river, almost too thin to notice. It softened the distant shoreline, making the opposite bank appear dreamlike in the gentle dawn. One fisherman rested his hand upon the smooth wooden edge of his boat. The wood still felt cool from the night. He appreciated that feeling. By midday it would become warm beneath the sun, and by afternoon he would gladly rest beneath the little reed shelter fixed to the center of his boat. The shelter was simple. Several wooden poles supported tightly woven bundles of papyrus reeds. The roof did not cover the entire boat. It covered only enough space for 1 or 2 people. Yet those few square feet of shade could make the difference between quiet endurance and complete exhaustion. The fisherman never questioned its value. As the boat drifted into deeper water, the morning breeze followed. It carried the smell of wet reeds, river mud, and flowering plants growing along the banks. Birds skimmed low across the surface. Fish disturbed the water with gentle splashes. The river itself seemed almost sleepy, moving with patient confidence toward lands far beyond the horizon. Far inland, farmers were already gathering beside irrigation canals. The earth still held moisture from the night's cool air. Bare feet pressed softly into damp soil. Some men carried wooden hoes across their shoulders. Others balanced baskets woven from reeds. A few led patient oxen that walked without complaint toward waiting fields. Everyone knew the first hours after sunrise were the best time for difficult work. Muscles felt stronger. Breathing felt easier. The sun had not yet begun to weigh heavily upon their backs. One farmer paused beside a clay jar resting beneath a sycamore tree. The jar had been placed there the evening before. It sat partially buried in cool earth, its lower half hidden beneath loose soil. This was another quiet habit passed from one generation to another. The earth beneath the surface remained cooler than the air above. By letting part of the jar rest below ground, the water stayed refreshing for much longer. He poured a cup. The coolness surprised him every morning. No matter how many years passed, that first drink remained one of the day's simplest pleasures. Nearby, his oldest son watched carefully. He noticed where the jar had been placed. He noticed how his father brushed loose soil around its sides after each use. Nothing was explained with long speeches. The lesson lived in ordinary actions. One day the boy would place his own water jar beneath cool earth without even thinking about where he had learned the habit. The field slowly filled with quiet sounds. Wood touching earth. Water flowing through narrow canals. Birds searching for insects among young plants. The distant voices of workers greeting one another before beginning another day. No loud commands echoed across the fields. The rhythm of labor spoke for itself. Each person understood the work waiting ahead. The sun continued its steady climb. Golden light spread across the green fields until every leaf shimmered with tiny drops of moisture left behind by the night. For a little while, those droplets sparkled beautifully. Then they disappeared. The warmth claimed them one by one. No one seemed surprised. That was simply what morning always did. Back inside the village, workshops came alive. A carpenter opened wide the shutters of his workroom. Fresh air flowed inside. He smiled quietly. The room smelled of cedar, acacia, and smooth wood shavings left from the day before. He reached for his tools. Each one rested exactly where he had placed it before sunset. Order made work easier. Searching beneath the growing heat only wasted precious strength. His apprentice arrived carrying a small clay water bottle. The older man nodded approvingly. "Never begin without water," he said softly. The boy smiled. He had heard those words many times. Yet they never sounded like a warning. They sounded like kindness. Together they began smoothing wooden boards that would become stools for a nearby household. Thin curls of wood gathered upon the floor. The scent of fresh timber filled the workshop. The open doorway allowed every passing breeze to wander through. Even the smallest movement of air felt welcome. Across another street, a weaver prepared her loom. Bundles of flax fibers rested neatly beside her. The morning light entered from one narrow window, bright enough to work comfortably without allowing too much heat inside. She appreciated that balance. The builders who had shaped the room years earlier had understood exactly where to place the opening. Too much sunlight would have made the room uncomfortable before noon. Too little would have forced her to work in darkness. Instead, the space welcomed soft light while protecting its occupants from the harshest hours of the day. As her hands moved steadily through the threads, she listened to the growing sounds of the village. Donkeys pulling carts. Merchants greeting customers. Children carrying water. The distant tapping of stone workers beginning another day. Each sound blended into a calm harmony. Nothing seemed hurried. Nothing seemed out of place. The entire village moved together, almost like the slow current of the Nile itself. As the morning advanced, merchants began arranging their stalls beneath wide reed awnings. The coverings cast long shadows across baskets filled with onions, figs, lentils, garlic, cucumbers, melons, and fragrant herbs gathered from nearby gardens. Some stalls displayed folded linen. Others offered clay lamps, woven mats, polished wooden bowls, or finely crafted baskets. Everyone sought shade before choosing a place to stand. The awnings did more than protect the merchants. They invited visitors to linger comfortably. People naturally gathered wherever the sun could not reach them directly. Conversations unfolded slowly beneath those woven roofs. News traveled from village to village. Someone spoke of a successful flax harvest farther south. Another described unusually large fish caught 2 days earlier. An elderly traveler recalled how the river had flooded many seasons ago, leaving rich soil across distant fields. The stories drifted through the shaded marketplace as gently as the breeze itself. No one raised their voice. There was no need. Morning still belonged to comfort. The greatest heat had not yet arrived. At the edge of the marketplace, a young potter carefully arranged dozens of fresh water jars. Each one was slightly different. Some were broad and round. Others were tall and narrow. Their smooth clay surfaces glowed softly beneath filtered sunlight. A woman stopped to examine one with particularly thick walls. She tapped it gently with her fingertips. The sound pleased her. The potter smiled. He explained that thicker clay often helped keep water cool for longer hours. She nodded thoughtfully. Her oldest jar had served her family for nearly 20 years. Its rim had chipped. Its base had worn smooth from countless journeys between house and well. Perhaps, she thought quietly, it was time for another. The potter wrapped the new jar carefully in woven reeds before placing it into her basket. She thanked him warmly. As she walked home beneath the still gentle morning sun, she carried not only a simple clay vessel, but another quiet promise of comfort for the long warm days that lay ahead. One more small piece of timeless wisdom in a land where people had learned, over countless generations, that surviving the Egyptian heat was never about defeating it, but about greeting each sunrise with patience, thoughtful preparation, and a deep respect for the natural rhythm of the world around them. The woman carried the new clay jar home with slow, careful steps. She balanced it against her hip with the ease of someone who had spent a lifetime carrying water, grain, baskets of vegetables, and bundles of flax along the same narrow streets. The jar was still new. Its surface was smooth beneath her fingers, and the pale reddish clay caught the gentle light of the morning sun. She did not hurry. There was no need. The village had been awake for several hours, yet the air still held the coolness that everyone treasured. These hours belonged to work that required strength. Soon enough, the warmth would settle over the rooftops, and every movement would become just a little slower. As she walked, she passed homes that looked different in small ways but shared many familiar features. Each had thick mud brick walls. Each offered some place of shade. Some doorways faced narrow alleys where sunlight entered only briefly each day. Others opened into quiet courtyards where children would later play beneath the protection of walls that had stood for generations. The streets themselves seemed designed for comfort. Unlike wide open spaces that allowed the sun to reach every corner, these narrow lanes spent much of the day in shadow. The buildings stood close together. When the morning sun climbed higher, one wall protected the next. Light and shade slowly traded places throughout the day, creating cool paths that experienced villagers naturally followed. Visitors sometimes noticed this without fully understanding why walking through one street felt easier than another. The people who lived there did not think about it. It had simply always been that way. The woman reached her home and placed the new jar beside the doorway before bringing it inside. She chose the coolest corner of the house. It rested against the northern wall where sunlight almost never reached directly. The floor beneath was packed earth, firm, and slightly cooler than the open courtyard outside. Before filling the vessel, she rinsed its inside carefully with clean water. The clay absorbed a little moisture. Its surface darkened for a few moments before returning to its warm natural color. Nearby, her youngest daughter watched with quiet curiosity. The little girl had seen her mother prepare new jars before, but she always enjoyed watching. Children often noticed things that adults no longer thought about. She ran one small hand across the outside of the jar. "It feels cool," she whispered. Her mother smiled. "It will feel even cooler tomorrow." The girl tilted her head. "Why?" Her mother paused for a moment before answering. The clay drinks a little water. The child looked at the jar again. It drinks. Her mother laughed softly. Only a little. She dipped a cloth into fresh water and gently wiped the outside of the vessel. Some of the water slowly disappears into the air. When that happens, the water inside becomes cooler. The little girl nodded, though she understood only part of the explanation. She did not need to understand everything. One day she would simply know where to place the family jars. She would know to keep them in shade. She would know to cover them with damp linen during the hottest weeks. The lesson would become part of her hands before it became part of her thoughts. Outside, the village continued its gentle rhythm. The sun had climbed higher now. Its light reflected from pale stone walls and dusty pathways. Long shadows had begun to shorten. Farmers worked steadily in nearby fields, taking advantage of every comfortable moment before midday. Along one irrigation canal, water moved quietly between rows of barley and emmer wheat. The narrow channels had been shaped with remarkable care. Every bend guided the precious water exactly where it was needed. The farmers understood that water itself could help cool the land. Where the canals flowed, the air often felt slightly softer. Not dramatically. Just enough for tired workers to notice. One young farmer stepped beside the canal after lifting heavy baskets of harvested vegetables. He knelt beside the water. Instead of drinking immediately, he cupped both hands and splashed cool water across his face. Tiny drops clung briefly to his skin. The breeze carried away some of the moisture. For a few peaceful moments, the heat seemed farther away. His older brother smiled. "You always do that." The younger man laughed quietly. "It always helps." His brother nodded. "It helped our father too." Simple habits often survived because they worked. No one claimed they solved every problem. They simply made difficult days a little easier. Nearby, an elderly farmer rested beneath the wide branches of a sycamore fig tree. Its leaves cast broad patches of shade across the ground. The tree had stood beside the canal for longer than anyone could remember. Many generations had rested beneath it. Children who once played around its trunk had become grandparents themselves. The old man leaned against the rough bark. His sandals rested beside him. The earth beneath the tree felt cool enough that he preferred placing his bare feet directly upon it. He closed his eyes. The breeze moved gently through the leaves above. Sunlight flickered across his face in shifting patterns. He could hear younger workers speaking quietly nearby. Their voices blended with birds, insects, and flowing water. Everything sounded peaceful. Even work had its own calm music. Across the river, another village slowly awakened to the brighter part of the morning. Smoke drifted upward from clay ovens. Women swept courtyards with reed brooms. Children carried baskets toward nearby wells. Goats wandered between houses, searching for scattered leaves. From a distance, the entire village seemed almost the same as the one across the water. That was the way of the Nile. Many communities shared similar rhythms. Each had its own stories, its own families, its own craftsmen. Yet all depended upon the same river, the same seasons, the same generous mornings before the heat settled across the valley. In one shaded workshop, a stonemason examined a newly delivered block of limestone. The stone had been cut from a quarry several days earlier and transported slowly by boat along the Nile. Its pale surface reflected much of the sunlight, making it more comfortable to work than darker stone. Still, the mason preferred beginning before midday. He picked up his copper chisel. Its metal felt pleasantly cool in his hand. Beside him, his apprentice arranged wooden mallets in neat rows. The older man believed that tidy tools made steady work. They began carving slowly. Each strike echoed softly beneath the workshop roof. Tiny pieces of limestone drifted downward like pale dust. The apprentice paused after several minutes. He wiped his forehead with a strip of linen. The master noticed. "Drink first," he said gently. The boy reached for a small clay bottle resting beneath the workbench. The water inside remained cool. Not cold. Simply refreshing enough to ease a dry throat. He drank slowly. Then returned to his carving. Neither spoke again for some time. The rhythm of careful work filled the silence. Nearby, a group of women gathered beneath a woven awning while preparing vegetables for the day's meal. Large baskets overflowed with onions, cucumbers, beans, herbs, and fresh greens gathered that morning. One woman peeled onions while another chopped herbs into a clay bowl. A third kneaded dough beneath the shade. The awning fluttered gently whenever the breeze arrived. Everyone appreciated even the slightest movement of air. One of the older women reached toward a hanging reed screen beside the courtyard entrance. She sprinkled a little water across its surface. The drops disappeared slowly into the woven fibers. Moments later, the breeze passed through the damp reeds before entering the courtyard. The women smiled almost together. "It feels better already," one of them whispered. No one expected miracles. No one imagined the air becoming cold. But the smallest comfort mattered. Life in ancient Egypt was often a collection of small comforts patiently gathered throughout the day. A cool drink. A shaded wall. A breeze through wet reeds. A midday rest. A rooftop beneath the stars. Each one alone seemed modest. Together they allowed people to live peacefully beneath one of the warmest skies on earth. By now the sunlight had become noticeably brighter. The village shimmered beneath its growing warmth. Children who had been running through the streets now played beneath trees or inside shaded courtyards. Dogs stretched out beneath carts. Cats slipped quietly into cool storage rooms where grain jars lined the walls. Pigeons rested along shaded roof edges instead of flying through the open sky. Every living creature seemed to understand the rhythm of the day. No one needed to be told. Nature itself offered the lesson every morning. Even the merchants adjusted their routines. The busiest trading happened early. Customers preferred walking while the air remained pleasant. By late morning, conversations became slower. People lingered beneath reed awnings instead of standing in direct sunlight. A merchant selling fine linen carefully rolled up the cloth that had been displayed outside. The bright sunlight could fade the delicate fibers over time. He carried each bundle into deeper shade. His father had taught him to do that many years earlier. Linen lasted longer when treated kindly. Like almost everything else in Egypt, comfort depended not upon great inventions, but upon patient care. The village moved steadily toward midday. The air grew warmer with every passing hour. Yet no one seemed surprised. Every family had already prepared for what was coming. Water jars waited in cool corners. Courtyards stood ready to welcome shade. Reed screens hung across open doorways. Meals had been started before the greatest heat arrived. Work requiring heavy strength was already well underway. The people did not race against the sun. They walked beside its rhythm, accepting its warmth with quiet wisdom, just as their parents had done, and their grandparents before them, beneath the same endless Egyptian sky that had watched over countless peaceful mornings along the timeless banks of the Nile. By the time the sun reached the middle of the sky, the light had changed once again. The soft gold of morning slowly disappeared, replaced by a brilliant white brightness that covered the Nile Valley from one end to the other. The air seemed almost to shimmer above the dusty roads, and distant trees looked as though they floated gently in the warm haze. It was the hottest part of the day. No one needed a sundial to know the hour. Their bodies felt it. The animals felt it. Even the birds changed their habits. The songs that had filled the early morning became fewer. Many birds settled among the thick branches of sycamore figs or date palms, where the leaves protected them from the strongest sunlight. Small sparrows tucked themselves into the shade of mud brick walls. Doves rested quietly beneath roof edges where the afternoon sun could not reach them. The village became calmer. Not empty. Simply quieter. A man who had spent the morning carrying baskets of grain now rested beneath a reed shelter beside the marketplace. He removed his sandals and brushed the fine dust from his feet with slow, careful movements. His feet had walked over packed earth, stone paths, and dry fields since before sunrise. Now they welcomed the cool shade beneath the shelter. Nearby stood a large clay jar filled with water. The outside of the vessel glistened with tiny drops of moisture. A young merchant lifted the lid. The cool smell of fresh water rose gently into the warm air. He filled a simple cup and handed it to the older man without saying a word. The man smiled gratefully. There was kindness in such ordinary moments. He drank slowly, never all at once. The water felt cool against his lips. It carried with it the quiet comfort of careful preparation. Someone had shaped the jar. Someone had fired it in a kiln. Someone had carried it from the potter's workshop. Someone had filled it before dawn. Many small acts had come together so that one tired traveler could enjoy a peaceful drink beneath the shade. This was how villages worked. Every craft supported another. Every family depended, in one way or another, upon the work of others. The potter needed the farmer. The farmer needed the carpenter. The carpenter needed the linen weaver. The weaver needed the merchant. The merchant needed the boatman. And all of them depended upon the Nile. Not far away, inside a modest mud brick house, the thick walls were quietly doing their work. Outside, the sunlight covered the roof with relentless warmth. Inside, however, the rooms remained pleasantly dim. The walls had absorbed the coolness of the previous night. Because they were so thick, the afternoon heat took many hours to travel through them. A little boy lay asleep upon a woven reed mat. His breathing was slow and peaceful. Beside him, his grandmother sat spinning flax into thread. Her hands moved almost without thought. The spindle turned smoothly. Twisting. Stretching. Turning again. She had repeated this movement so many thousands of times that it felt as natural as breathing. The room was almost silent. Only the faint scraping of flax fibers and the distant cooing of pigeons could be heard. Every now and then a breeze slipped through the small window high in the wall. It crossed the room gently before disappearing through the open doorway into the courtyard. The grandmother paused. She closed her eyes for a moment. The moving air touched her face. It carried the faint scent of damp clay from the family's water jars. The breeze lasted only a few seconds. Yet it refreshed the room in a way that no one could fully measure. Outside in the courtyard, her daughter prepared vegetables beneath a woven awning. The shade shifted slowly as the sun continued across the sky. Whenever a patch of sunlight reached her basket, she quietly moved it a little farther back beneath the shelter. Nothing remained in direct sunlight unless it truly needed to. Even baskets of fresh herbs rested beneath damp linen cloths to help keep them from drying too quickly. The woman glanced toward the doorway. Her son still slept peacefully. She smiled. Children often slept during the hottest hours. It was the most comfortable time to rest. When the air cooled again later in the afternoon, they would have plenty of energy to help with small household tasks or play quietly with friends. Across another courtyard, an elderly basket maker repaired a large grain basket. Its woven reeds had loosened after years of use. Instead of making a new one, he patiently replaced only the worn pieces. His fingers moved with remarkable precision. Each new reed slipped into place beside older ones that had darkened with age. The repaired basket would likely serve another family for many more seasons. Waste was rare. Almost everything found another purpose. Broken pottery became drainage for gardens. Worn linen became cleaning cloths. Old rope was woven into something new. The hot climate encouraged careful thinking. Making another long journey for fresh materials required time and energy. It was easier, and wiser, to care for what already existed. Beyond the village, the fields shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. Most of the hardest work had paused. Farmers gathered beneath scattered trees or simple reed shelters built beside irrigation canals. One shelter stood beside a patch of barley ready for harvest. Its roof was made from bundles of papyrus tied tightly to wooden poles. The shade beneath covered only a small space. Just enough for 6 workers. They sat close together. One man shared dried figs from a woven pouch. Another sliced onions into small pieces before eating them with coarse bread baked earlier that morning. Someone passed around a clay jar of cool water. The conversation remained quiet. No one spoke loudly during the heat. Saving energy had become another habit learned over many generations. One younger worker leaned back against a wooden post. "I think today is warmer than yesterday." The oldest farmer smiled gently. "Perhaps." He looked toward the river. "The river still flows." The younger man nodded. That answer was enough. As long as the Nile continued its journey, life would continue as well. Its water filled canals. Its floods nourished fields. Its breezes softened evenings. Its presence made the desert livable. No one expected comfort without effort. But they trusted the river. Near the riverbank itself, fishermen had drawn several boats beneath overhanging trees. The nets were spread carefully across the grass like reeds to dry. A young fisherman knelt beside one torn section. Using flax cord, he patiently repaired each broken knot. His father sat nearby carving a new wooden float for another net. Neither man hurried. Fishing required patience. Repairing nets required even more. The afternoon sun reflected brilliantly from the water beyond them. Looking directly across the river for too long made the eyes narrow against the brightness. So they worked beneath shade whenever possible. Above them, palm fronds swayed slowly. Each movement cast shifting shadows across the ground. The fishermen hardly noticed. They had spent countless afternoons beneath those same trees. The patterns of light had become familiar companions. Farther downstream, several children filled small clay cups from a shallow canal. Their mother had sent them to bring water for washing vegetables. The children laughed quietly as they walked home together. The cool cups felt pleasant against their hands. Every now and then one child held the cup against a warm cheek before continuing. Small pleasures belonged to everyone. Even children understood the value of cool water. Back in the marketplace, the busiest hours had passed. Most customers waited until later in the afternoon before returning. Merchants remained beneath wide reed awnings. Some repaired leather straps. Others counted grain. A linen seller carefully folded cloth into neat stacks. He occasionally sprinkled a little water onto the packed earth beneath his stall. The moisture settled the dust and slightly cooled the air around him. His father had always done the same. The customers appreciated it. Though the change was subtle, it made standing beneath the awning feel more comfortable. These little practices appeared everywhere. A damp cloth hanging over a doorway. A clay jar placed where breezes could reach it. A roof built slightly higher to allow warm air to rise. A courtyard planted with a small fig tree whose shade would deepen with every passing year. None of these things alone transformed the climate. Together they transformed daily life. As the afternoon slowly stretched onward, sunlight continued to pour across temple walls, village roofs, riverbanks, workshops, and distant fields. Yet beneath that great Egyptian sky, life remained calm. People adjusted naturally. They worked when strength was greatest. They rested when the heat demanded patience. They built homes that welcomed shade. They treasured every breeze that wandered through an open doorway. And without ever thinking of themselves as inventors, they quietly mastered the ancient art of living comfortably in one of the warmest landscapes on earth, guided not by machines or modern comforts, but by observation, tradition, and the gentle wisdom passed from one peaceful generation to the next. The afternoon lingered over the Nile Valley with the slow patience of an old friend. Nothing about it seemed eager to move on. The sunlight remained bright, though its sharp edge had begun to soften ever so slightly. The shadows beneath walls grew longer by only the smallest measure, a change so gradual that no one noticed it from one moment to the next. Yet the people noticed it in another way. Their bodies had lived through countless afternoons like this. Without looking at the sky, they could feel that the longest hours of heat were beginning to pass. A builder working beside a limestone wall paused and rested both hands upon his knees. The stones surrounding him had become warm through the morning, but now they no longer seemed to grow hotter. He looked toward the shadow cast by a nearby column. It had stretched only the width of a hand since he last noticed it, but that was enough. He smiled quietly. The afternoon was changing. Around him, other workers continued with the same careful rhythm they had followed since dawn. No one swung a hammer with unnecessary force. No one lifted more weight than needed. Every movement was deliberate. Strength, they knew, lasted longer when shared gently throughout the day. Nearby, a young apprentice carried a basket of copper chisels toward a shaded work area. The tools gleamed softly beneath the filtered light. He placed them upon a folded piece of linen rather than directly onto the stone floor. The cloth kept the metal from becoming too warm beneath the lingering heat. His master noticed the thoughtful gesture and nodded with quiet approval. Little habits often revealed careful teaching. No lesson needed to be spoken aloud. Across the village, the marketplace had settled into one of its peaceful afternoon moods. The lively conversations of early morning had become slower. Merchants leaned comfortably beneath reed awnings, enjoying the shade while waiting for evening customers. A spice seller arranged small clay bowls filled with fragrant herbs. The scents drifted gently through the still air. Ground coriander, fresh dill, mint gathered near irrigation canals, crushed cumin, dry fennel. Together they created a fragrance that mixed with warm earth, fresh bread, and river air. People passing nearby slowed without realizing why. The smells reminded them of evening meals waiting at home. An elderly woman approached one of the stalls carrying a woven basket. Inside rested several onions, a handful of beans, and a small loaf purchased earlier that morning. She stopped beside the herb seller. Not because she urgently needed anything. She simply wished to enjoy a few moments beneath the shade. The merchant poured her a small cup of cool water from a clay jar resting beside his stall. She thanked him with a warm smile. The cup felt cool against her hands. She held it for a few moments before drinking. Even that gentle touch seemed comforting. The merchant had placed the jar upon a low stand where air could move freely around it from every direction. A damp cloth covered the opening. The cloth kept dust away while helping the water remain pleasantly cool. His father had taught him that arrangement many years before. Now his own son watched carefully from the back of the stall. The boy noticed everything. Where the jar stood. How often the cloth was dampened. When fresh water was added. One day these small details would belong to him. Lessons passed quietly from one generation to the next, woven into ordinary afternoons. Beyond the marketplace, narrow streets remained comfortably shaded between rows of mud brick homes. The houses stood close enough that one protected another from the strongest sunlight. Their walls carried the color of the earth itself. Soft brown, golden clay, faded red. Here and there, white plaster reflected the light with gentle brightness. Children walked barefoot through the shaded lanes. The ground beneath their feet felt much cooler than the open roads beyond the village. A little girl carried a small basket filled with freshly washed figs. She walked carefully toward her grandmother's home. The fruit rested beneath a linen cloth to protect it from the sun. When she reached the doorway, her grandmother welcomed her with quiet affection. The old woman lifted the cloth and smiled. The figs still looked fresh. They stayed cool, the child said proudly. Her grandmother nodded. Because you kept them in the shade. The lesson was simple. Shade protected more than people. It protected food, water, wood, cloth, everything that families depended upon. Inside the house, the air remained peaceful. The thick walls had slowly absorbed the warmth of the afternoon, yet they still felt cooler than the streets outside. A small window high above allowed sunlight to enter without filling the room with heat. The opening also welcomed gentle breezes whenever they wandered through the village. The grandmother placed the figs inside a shallow pottery bowl. She covered them once more with damp linen. The moisture would help keep the fruit from drying too quickly. Nothing about her movements seemed hurried. Each task unfolded with calm attention. Nearby, a young mother prepared flax fibers for spinning. She dipped her fingers lightly into a bowl of water before separating the strands. The moisture made the fibers easier to handle. Her hands moved with remarkable patience. Outside, the warmth remained. Inside, quiet work continued. The house itself seemed to encourage calm. Farther along the Nile, a small fishing village rested beneath tall palms. Most of the boats had already returned from the morning's work. They lay pulled safely onto the muddy banks, their wooden hulls casting narrow shadows upon the ground. Several fishermen sat beneath a broad sycamore tree repairing paddles worn smooth by many seasons upon the river. One man carefully rubbed oil into the wood. The paddle had served him for years. He hoped it would serve for many more. His grandson watched from nearby. The boy traced the grain of another paddle with curious fingers. "Why do you always oil them?" he asked. The old fisherman smiled. "The sun dries everything." He lifted the paddle into the light. "If we care for the wood, it stays strong." The boy nodded thoughtfully. The answer made sense. The sun gave life to their crops. It brightened every morning. Yet it also demanded respect. Wood dried. Reeds became brittle. Rope loosened. Clay cracked if forgotten. Everything required care. The old fisherman looked toward the river. The afternoon breeze had begun to strengthen. Tiny ripples spread across the water. He could smell wet reeds carried on the wind. Soon the air would become even more comfortable. He knew this because he had watched the river every day for more than 60 years. The Nile spoke quietly. Those who listened carefully understood its rhythms. Not far away, women gathered beside a washing place where clothing had been cleaned earlier that morning. The linen now hung beneath long shaded frames rather than directly beneath the afternoon sun. Strong sunlight could dry cloth too quickly, making it stiff. Gentler shade allowed the breeze to finish the work more slowly. One woman lifted a freshly dried garment. It felt soft. She folded it carefully. Another smiled. "My mother always said the wind is kinder than the sun." Everyone laughed softly. Many mothers had offered the same advice. Across the fields, farmers slowly returned to their work. The worst of the day's heat had passed. Water still flowed quietly through irrigation canals. Some workers rolled up their linen garments to splash cool water over tired legs before returning to the crops. The muddy banks felt wonderfully cool beneath bare feet. Dragonflies hovered above the surface. Frogs slipped silently into deeper water. The fields themselves seemed calmer now. Golden light replaced the harsh white brightness of midday. The plants stood quietly in long orderly rows, their leaves moving gently whenever the breeze arrived. An old farmer looked across the fields with peaceful satisfaction. The harvest still needed many days of careful work. There was no reason to hurry. The crops would be gathered in their proper time. The river would continue flowing. Tomorrow would bring another sunrise. Another cool morning. Another warm afternoon. Another quiet evening. Life beside the Nile rarely demanded speed. It asked instead for patience. Steady hands. Thoughtful habits. Careful preparation. As the sun began its slow journey toward the western desert, the light softened across every rooftop, every courtyard, every temple wall, and every stretch of fertile land. Families sensed that the most comfortable hours of the day were slowly returning. Soon bread would bake once again, children would fill the shaded streets with gentle laughter, fishermen would untie their boats for the evening waters, and cool breezes from the timeless river would wander patiently through open doorways, reminding every soul in ancient Egypt that after every long day of warmth, peace always arrived quietly with the evening air. The last light of the day rested gently upon the waters of the Nile, turning the quiet river into a ribbon of soft gold. The warmth that had filled the valley since sunrise slowly began to loosen its gentle hold, and a peaceful evening settled over the ancient land. Farmers walked home along familiar paths with empty baskets resting lightly upon their shoulders. Their footsteps were unhurried, softened by the fine dust that had known the touch of countless generations before them. Builders placed their tools carefully inside woven baskets, knowing they would greet them again with the next dawn. Fishermen tied their boats securely along the riverbank, listening to the quiet sound of water brushing against smooth wooden hulls. Across the villages, cooking fires glowed softly. The comforting smell of warm bread drifted through narrow streets. Clay pots simmered gently over small flames. Lentils, onions, herbs, and fresh vegetables filled the evening air with simple, familiar scents that welcomed every tired worker home. Children spoke more quietly now. The day's game slowly came to an end as sleepy eyes looked toward parents preparing places to rest. Small hands helped roll out woven reed mats upon flat rooftops. Linen sheets were shaken gently in the cooling breeze before being spread across smooth plaster warmed only faintly by the fading day. Above them, the sky deepened from pale blue into rich indigo. One by one, the first stars returned. The same stars that had watched over ancient Egypt for thousands of peaceful nights. The same stars that had guided fishermen across calm waters. The same stars that had shone above farmers waiting for another harvest, potters shaping fresh clay, weavers working patient threads of flax, scribes recording careful words upon papyrus, and families gathering together at the close of another ordinary day. The Nile continued its endless journey. It asked for nothing. It hurried for no one. Its gentle current carried cool evening air across the valley, slipping through palm leaves, drifting between mud brick homes, wandering quietly into shaded courtyards, and climbing gently toward rooftops where families welcomed its familiar touch. The clay water jars still rested in their cool corners. The thick mud brick walls slowly released the warmth they had gathered throughout the day. Reed screens moved ever so slightly whenever the breeze passed through them. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called softly. Closer to the river, frogs answered one another from hidden reeds. A fisherman, already lying upon the deck of his small boat, watched the stars reflected upon the water until he could no longer tell where the sky ended and the river began. Nearby, an elderly grandmother whispered one final story to her grandchildren. Her voice grew quieter with every sentence. Before the story reached its end, one child was already asleep. Then another. Soon only the adults remained awake, smiling gently beneath the moonlight as they listened to the peaceful sounds of the night surrounding them. There was comfort in knowing that tomorrow would arrive just as today had. The cool hours before dawn. The first bread from the ovens. The quiet walk toward the fields. The shimmer of sunlight upon the Nile. The shelter of thick walls. The shade of sycamore trees. The refreshing drink from a cool clay jar. The evening breeze returning once again. Nothing needed to change. The ancient people of Egypt never conquered the heat. They never tried to command the desert or silence the sun. Instead, they learned to listen. They listened to the wind that crossed the river. They listened to the coolness hidden within shaded walls. They listened to the quiet wisdom carried from one generation to the next. And in listening, they discovered a peaceful way to live beside one of the warmest landscapes on earth. Now the village has grown completely still. The cooking fires have faded into glowing embers. The streets are empty. The workshops rest in silence. The temples stand peacefully beneath the stars. The Nile continues its timeless journey through the darkness, just as it always has, carrying cool water, quiet breezes, and gentle dreams toward another distant dawn. And as the soft desert wind whispers through the palm trees, and the calm river glides silently beneath the moonlit sky, ancient Egypt slowly disappears into the peaceful night, leaving only the quiet rhythm of flowing water, the cool breath of the evening air, and the comforting stillness of a world at rest.